Hi, everyone. Welcome so much for coming. Great to see you all here. My name is Ed.
And I'm Rick.
And we are from MassiveMusic. That's us there. We asked the team for the best photo that we had, and they all recommended one that doesn't have either me or Rick in it, so read into that what you will. So today, we're going to be talking to you guys about the evolution of sonic branding and the role of creativity and intentionality within that. What we're going to be doing today is talking through some of our own examples, some of the work that we've done. We're also going to highlight and spotlight some of the really interesting work happening around the landscape, so it's not just going to be all about us. Before we get into the future, let's look at the past. Let's turn back time. There's going to be a lot of this. So let's go back to the start of sonic branding. How did this all kind of begin? So sonic branding in its kind of current form dates back to the 1920s with what we call the jingle era. So the jingle era began in around about 1926 when brands started to understand that if you combine a message with a memorable melody, you end up with something that's a little bit more interesting, a little bit more memorable. So the first example of this, 1926, the Wheaties jingle. A little bit quaint by today's standards, but the basics were there. So combining a message with something that's memorable to create something that kind of sticks in people's heads a little bit more. 47 years later, in the 1970s, Dr. Pepper dropped this banger. And this is a sound that Dr. Pepper played with and evolved for the better part of 40 years, even adapting the lyrics from So Misunderstood all the way through to What's the Worst That Could Happen. And what's interesting about the jingle era is that the jingle era, like dinosaurs, lasted a little bit longer than people probably realize. And just like the dinosaurs, despite being really cool, they did eventually go extinct. So according to a study by The Atlantic a couple of years ago, they found that in 1998, about 11% of US ads were using some kind of jingle. And by 2009, only 2% of them were using jingles. And this gave way to the Sonic logo era of sonic branding. We can't talk about the Sonic logo era of sonic branding without talking about this sound. As if this needs any introduction, this is Intel's The Wave. This appeared in 1995. It's how I tell my mum what I do for a living. It's one of the most famous examples of sonic branding in the world. It's often cited as being the start of the sonic logo era, but for my money, that era actually began about 4 years earlier with this sound. So I love that sound. So this sound appeared in 1991. This was on all 40 million cartridges of Sonic the Hedgehog 1 that was sold. It's still one of the top 20 best-selling games of all time. And Sega actually used 1/8 of the cartridge's memory just to have that sound in place. So even back then, they knew this stuff was really, really important. Flash forward a few years to 2004, and we can't talk about sonic branding without mentioning The Godfather. There's not really much you can say about this at this point. It was created by Justin Timberlake and Pusha T. It has evolved over years. It actually turned 20 years old last year. And the Intel logo turns 30 years old this year. In fact, this year, the Windows startup sound was inducted into the Congressional Library, cementing its status as a cultural artifact. So we are getting to the end and the maturity of the Sonic logo era. So what comes after the Sonic logo era? Let me ask you a question. What do MasterCard and Naughty's new metal band, Linkin Park, have in common? The answer is this guy, Mike Shinoda. So Mike Shinoda is a multi-instrumentalist rapper in Linkin Park. He is also who MasterCard called upon to usher in what we call the systems era of sonic branding. So the systems era emphasizes flexibility and creative holism to be able to create sound.
One of the things that I liked about the notes is that when I started to play them using different instruments, all of a sudden they jumped to other cultures. And that to me was so important. The tiniest little things can actually make a big difference at the end of the day.
So what he's referring to there is using the same kind of musical equity, say melodies, chords, sound design, etc., and creating them in such a way that they can be adapted into long form, UX, UI, physical spaces, experiences. And it's a philosophy that really emphasizes that creative flexibility. It's also the approach that we took when we worked with Colgate a few years ago. Now, we're going to play you a medley of Colgate long-form tracks. Listen carefully, and I'm sure you'll hear a consistent melody appearing throughout.
My name's Caleb. What's yours? I'm Grace. Did you just move here? Yeah. Cool. Fall in love with brushing.
I'm an expert survivalist. That's why I rely on Colgate Total. Colgate's most powerful antibacterial protection that works for 12 hours non-stop.
So all that brings us up to date, all that great work and that progress brings us up to the kind of an era that we enter now, whereby more and more brands are engaging with music and deploying it and realizing the importance and the potency of it. But there's a downside to that as well, because we're seeing that there's a lot of homogeneity, there's a lot of similar approaches. And what we'd love to do now is to urge you to close your eyes and open your ears and have a listen to something that we call the Bing Bong Apocalypse. So a whole range of stuff there. You probably recognize some of them. You probably encountered quite a few of them. And you hopefully heard a lot of the similarities in the sound design, the structures, the tonality. And that's what we're finding more and more. Although it's more exciting for us and what we do, that more and more businesses are engaging with and deploying sound, it does come with a problem. And when we look at some of the stats around that, there's some clear reasons why. There's similar approaches occurring across the board. Category conventions are being developed, as we'll see in a moment. And a recent study by Charles Spence from Oxford University talked about the prevalence of the 5-note melodic sonic logo, perhaps inspired by some of the examples that Ed pointed to a few minutes ago. But of course, that wouldn't happen in visual design, would it? All jokes aside, this is a very good comparison to what's happening in our world at the moment. I know this has created a lot of debate and a lot of talk over the last few years, the sort of flattening of visual expression in the same way that we're seeing now with sound. So what I'd like to do is, again, invite you to open your ears. We've got a selection here based on streaming services, which we've layered up just to give you an idea of the kind of category tropes that can be developed or that can appear. So we're probably all familiar with those as well, and they're all following the same kind of conceptual story arc, the same kind of structure, sometimes the same kind of sound design and tonality, and we see that occurring more and more across different categories, one of which, the automotive industry, which, again, we'd love for you to indulge us and take part in a little quiz here. with a show of hands to tell us which of these two brands this sound belongs to. I'll just play that again.
Who says Volkswagen? Show of hands for Volkswagen.
Or is it Kia?
You've fallen into our trap.
Yeah. We got you. It's actually Volkswagen, and it's it's a problem that we're seeing across categories. We're using the automotive industry as an example here because it's very prevalent there. I think there's only 10% of automotive brands, brands are not achieving any more than 10% attribution through their sound. In fact, the best example is Audi, who are achieving 8% of that attribution. So there's a whole load of work that can be done there to break these category tropes and to stand out from the crowd and do things differently. And we think that's the solution. We think there's a great opportunity as we step into this maturing era and realm for sonic sound, sonic branding, music strategy, and the way that it's deployed and works for businesses to become a really potent force.
Absolutely. So what is the solution? Well, there's no great mystery to it. We believe in intentionality and creativity. Just as there is in visual design, let's bring that into the world of sonic branding. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about a few examples of sonic logos doing really creative, intentional things, and then we're going to talk about some broader examples from there. So let's start with question one. Does the sonic logo need to be a 5-note melody? No. It can be this. So that's the sound of TikTok. We did that about 2 or 3 years ago. It's now known by about 80 to 90% of the population. It's a very short sound, but it's actually full of intentionality. There's a lot of the brand in that sound. So first and foremost, it is a tick and a tock. It's an onomatopoeia, so we use those 2 notes. It has the 808 sub-hit at the start, which is a common sound that you hear on the platform. It also has an E major 7 chord, so not a resolved E major, so it feels like it's kind of not quite complete. There's something kind of coming afterwards, which is what you want the experience to be on TikTok. There's also a dog's bark in there somewhere, which is an accident, which is actually kind of good for the sound of TikTok because there is a place where happy accidents happen. So I'm going to play it again, and if anyone can hear the dog bark, then I guess like 5 points or something. I don't think we're doing points, are we? But apparently it's in there somewhere. So it doesn't have to be a 5-note melody. Does it need to be a major key melody? Well, no, it doesn't need to be a major key melody either. This is the sound of Left Beer that we made with Jones Knowles Ritchie. This is for those familiar, Left is a monastery beer from Belgium. And when we created the sonic logo for Left, what we were trying to do is kind of extend that monastic world that JKR had made and extend it into sound. And to do that, we use what's called functional harmony. So functional harmony is using that kind of tension, that kind of pull and release. Like there's this dominant fifth that kind of sets things up, and then there's this release that you can hear. So it doesn't have to be a major melody either. Does it need to be a melody at all? Well, no, it also doesn't need to be a melody at all. This is a piece of work by a great agency based in Shoreditch called Zelig Sound. If anyone's in here, give me a whoop. No, not here. Purely percussive, using the distinct asset of the bucket and creating sounds around that. It's an intensely satisfying sound. There's no melodic content to it, really, at all. But it feels great. And actually, when I was working on this presentation, I just kept going back to this and listening to it again, because it's really, really cool. So it doesn't have to be melodic at all. It can just be the series of pops that feels really good. So that sounds really good, but does it need to sound good? No. I hesitate to say that because this is our own work I'm about to play. But it can be a little bit rough around the edges, like this work that we did for ART in Australia. So what we were doing there was audiating the sound of Artie, who is their mascot, this huge kind of ball-like monster. And it's a rough sound, but it's way more unique than anything else in the retirement fund category in Australia, which makes it more interesting and more compelling. Play it again. Okay. Does it need to be musical in the slightest? No, it doesn't need to be musical in the slightest. This is one of my favorite sounds of all time. Oh, come on.
Burger King.
This is Burger King France. I don't need to tell you what it is, but it's really charming. It's really unique. It's built on a very human insight about satisfaction, and it's a little bit unflattering. But Burger King could have just done, Burger King or whatever. But they didn't. They did this sound, and it's really interesting. So let's have another listen.
Burger King.
One of my faves as well, actually. I love the fact as well that it plays with the perception of, fine dining, the whole classic legacy of French food, and all I can think of is just seeing crumbs and food fall out of this guy's face as he's saying Burger King. But Ed's talked about the kind of progress, development, the variety that can work with sonic logos, but we'd also like to talk a bit about going beyond that as well, and how brands can create very distinctive assets, great attribution through different mechanics. The first example of which is Sunier Gin, who took their product packaging, did a collaboration with the Scottish Opera to celebrate 60 years to integrate sound into their product. Creating a memorable and signature sort of brand moment. And what's interesting about that, the scale of 14 notes within that directly correlated to the 14 botanicals within the gin's recipe. So there's a nice kind of combination of musicology and mixology there. Moving away from alcohol, because it's only the middle of the day, but still thinking about product. We're big fans of the use of UX, UI sounds within composition, and how brands pay attention to the connection point, the touch points where people encounter them. I haven't got my phone with me, but we all have our devices. We're all very aware of them and kind of take for granted the sound design that comes out of them repeatedly throughout the day. And there's room to celebrate that more. So we know Apple created whole campaigns around celebrating that part of their brand, because that is really where we all encounter it. And moving on to something more, altogether more human, the use of voice. So Marks and Spencers have made their advertising famous through the use of voice, the way they use a kind of luxurious performance style over time. It's become very attributable, very ownable. And what it does really, it kind of turns functional retail messaging of buy this chicken or buy this salmon into something wholly ownable and memorable, driving brand recall. There you go. And back into the automotive industry, we've already talked a little bit about that, but how can you differentiate and how can you leverage what your brand's about? I think that's an important point, what we're talking about as well. It's not just creativity out of nowhere, it's extending the brand's values, the brand purpose. So we look at a brand like Rivian, who created the sound for their EV vehicles, sorry, and it kind of expressed their brand purpose to create sustainable transport for a future and save the planet for future generations by deploying the sound of nature to create the sound of their vehicle.
We combined field recordings of water and wind from Mammoth Lakes, Laguna Beach, and the Colorado River. The result is a soothing sonic word that safely announces the vehicle's presence while also blending into the natural world.
Beautiful. Altogether, we're nearly out of time, so altogether for another talk, but we see huge opportunity in that space as well with electric vehicles and the use of sound for safety, for ownability, etc. And finally, we'd be very remiss of us to not finish maybe on some work that's from our own expertise with music strategy, looking at a brand like Dove, who have consistently deployed iconic songs in partnership with emerging artists and up-and-coming artists, again, kind of building on their commitment to inclusivity and diversity, so extending the essence of their brand through sound. Whoop, whoop.
All right, we better wrap this up because they told us there's a trapdoor on the stage and they're going to open it if we run too long. So 3 things to remember. Sound is no longer nice to have. We're tired of having this conversation. Let's move on from it. Sound is really, really important. Let's think about how we use it really carefully and thoughtfully rather than just whether we should use it at all. Develop a design ear for brands. Just as you have a design eye, think critically about sound and the way that you're deploying sound. Let's move things forward in this way. And then finally, be more creative and intentional. Let's try and reframe some of the briefs that we're having. If someone says, I want a Sonic logo, ask, is that actually the right thing? Is that actually the thing that you need? Or could we do something that's a little bit more true to what you want to do? So final thing, be creative, be intentional, and above all, stop making sense. Thank you.